Hello, hello. Happy Monday. Akua here. I also respond to Aqua and Ikria. And I am super excited about the content I'm going to be sharing today. If you haven't had a chance yet, just wanted to remind you all that my new podcast episode is out today. And I am talking all about my own coaching business and some of the things I would change within my coaching business. So if you're interested and you haven't listened to my new podcast episode yet, please make sure that you do so. It is the Open Door Conversations podcast. You can find it on Spotify and any one of those podcast places. So today, my topic is something I am incredibly excited to talk a little bit more about. With the work that I do, a lot of times I get asked, why is it so important to take leadership seriously? Why do you focus on leadership? Why are you focused on the people at the top instead of the people at the bottom, right? So a lot of the people I support tend to find that the issues are with everyone else, right? The issues are with the team. The issue are with, is with the employees. It's not with me. And one of the things that I'd love to teach is really just the importance of recognizing that as a leader, right, you can play a massive role in whether or not your team is able to go to the next level. So really just recognizing that as a leader, there is so much, right? So much that you have an impact on, and how you show up, the perceptions that you have, the stories you tell yourself are a massive part of that. So today we're going to be talking about the true cost of losing an employee. And according to some of this research that I found online from a really interesting human being who works at Deloitte, there are 7 different costs. I'm sure that we could combine some, or we could maybe add to them. But I think ultimately at the end of the day, the thing that we need to recognize and the thing that we need to get all comfortable wrapping our heads around is that there are so many more costs to losing a person than we sometimes realize. And that is not to say that people should not be let go. That is not to say that everyone that you bring onto your team will be able to add to your bottom line or really add to your business. But it's so very important to get very curious, especially if we see that we have a retention problem, especially if we see that people are leaving or complaining about certain things. So a lot of times I hear this, and this is something actually that I was told when I first started off as a co-founder, a managing director, someone who was launching something that was new. And the thing that we hear a lot of times as founders is that we should constantly be recruiting, and that we should constantly be hiring. As a founder. And I really disagree. I don't agree with this. And I think that what it does is it forces people to focus more on those who are entering than those who are actually already through their doors. If anything, as a founder, you should be focused on retention and focused on building processes and structures. But if you are overwhelmed, if you're overworked, if you are burnt out, it's really difficult for you to do that. And the only thing that you can sometimes see is that ball that's directly in front of your face. And that's why it's so important for you, one, to build your self-awareness and become aware of how you're showing up and what's happening, because that's going to have an impact on how you engage with others and also how you set expectations for others as well. So really just recognizing where you are at and that can impact how you show up is a massive part of this. All right. So why should we care? Why should we even have this conversation, or why should I even be sharing this information? It's so important because research shows that losing an employee can range from tens and thousands of dollars to over 2 times the employee's annual salary. And if you're working at a fast-growing startup and you don't have much in terms of resources, losing an employee can be huge. Not only do you lose the institutional knowledge, do you lose the processes this person might have been involved in, but you also lose the little bit of resources that you were able to invest in them. All right. So what I'm going to be doing, and I mentioned this earlier on, but in this live stream, I'll be sharing the 7 costs of losing an employee and what you really should be focusing on. If you'd like to take this conversation to the next level, you're always welcome to reach out, and happy to jump on a little leadership review call with you. But really just recognizing that it first starts with cultivating your self-awareness and really getting curious about whether or not this is an issue. Okay, so I just wanted to share a little bit more about my background and why I feel like I'm someone who can speak on this beyond some of the research that I've done. I've also personally experienced a lot of hiring, and I'm not necessarily proud of this part, but I've experienced a lot of hiring and a lot of firing. And I've, hired and fired hundreds of employees between Ghana and Nigeria, and I've worked with tons of different service providers in my own business now. So I've also left amazing paid opportunities myself for different reasons, and for some of the reasons that I will share in a few minutes. So really, just recognize that within this super interconnected world that we now live in, it's so easy to lose employees to other opportunities, right? If anything, right, we're competing against so many other opportunities, and right now, right, when we talk about the Great Reshuffle or the Great Resignation, it's really a time where employees are reflecting on the types of work that they're doing and really reflecting on their personal lives and seeing whether or not there's an opportunity there for them to find something that has a little bit more of alignment, right? Another thing that's coming up, and I had a conversation with the founder about this recently, is that some employees are also attempting to work at several places at once, right? So, when we talk about losing an employee, though I'm focused primarily on an employee that leaves you maybe in a lurch or that is potentially fired, we also need to talk about the fact that there are employees that you might be losing through disengagement, right? So there are employees that you might be losing because they've found other opportunities, but they're not going to stop working for you as well. So they're trying to take advantage of both places. And that can also be an issue for your bottom line. That could also be an issue for your company if they're not able to keep up with both. All right. So, what are some of these costs, right? And what are some of the things that really happen when you do lose an employee? So, let's get into them. So, the first one here, and I think the key thing that we need to keep in mind, right, depending on where you are within your business or what level of leadership that you're at, you may find that you spend more time or less time within some of these different situations. But the first thing, really, just to recognize that there is a cost to hiring a new person. So, if you're within a fast growing startup that's really, really small, that cost is going to come from you. It's going to be your time. So it costs time and energy and also resources, right, to advertise for that position, to interview for that position, right, to screen, and then to finally, hopefully, onboard them. And that's the second cost that I have on here, the cost of onboarding a new person. And I think that so many companies can do a better job of that. I know that's something that I had to learn the hard way when I was running a fast growing startup, really just recognizing that onboarding process, right, that's probably where you're going to be a little bit more hands-on, where it's going to take some extra energy potentially, right? Some extra training, some extra management, right? Once again, that is you time. So that's something that you're going to lose if you lose an individual or that individual's disengaged. The next one I have on here is loss of productivity. And that's something that I talk a lot about, right? So the importance of engagement for performance and productivity. So a new person can take 1 to 2 years to reach the productivity of an existing person, right? And so once again, a lot of these stats are coming from more corporate or more structured environments. So imagine what that could look like within your startup, right? So once again, within a startup, a lot of times things aren't structured, things aren't necessarily written down. So it could become even more of an issue, even more lost productivity within a much smaller startup. And that's why it's so important to take the time and energy to make sure that you have a very good hiring process and to make sure that you have a very good onboarding process. That way, a person, it does not get wrapped up within your company if they're not someone who can really add to your bottom line or really add to your business. They're leaving, they're out the door before they become someone who's incredibly important and that has institutional knowledge. The next one I have on here, number 4, is loss of engagement and psychological safety. And this is something I think that is really key and that we don't always think about as leaders, right? We think that, it's going to be fine. People will get over it. No one will talk about it. And the reality is that other employees will see this high turnover, right? And they might take this as a signal that something's wrong, whether or not they're aware of it. There's stories they might tell themselves, and that could lead to disengagement and a loss of productivity as well. So just keeping that in mind. Next I have on here, and that's number 5, is errors and mistakes. So when you have someone new join the team, they are more likely to make mistakes, more likely to have errors. And this means that that's not necessarily great for your customers and people maybe who are engaging with individuals within your business. All right. The next one I have on here, number 6, is the training cost. So depending on how long an employee has been within your business, you've probably spent a lot of time and energy, whether it's you as the founder or somebody else within your team or external sort of consultants and trainers that you've brought on. That's going to be lost when you lose that employee. Once again, whether they're moving to another opportunity or if they're disengaged and not focused on the job that they've been given within your business. All right. This last one I have on here, once again, it's a little bit more intangible, but I think it's still really important for us to keep in mind as founders, as business owners and really as leaders, is recognizing that there is a cost to culture, right? So even beyond that psychological safety and that point of psychological safety, there is a cultural impact, right? So whenever someone leaves, there is going to be questions. People are going to talk about it, and people are going to start to also reflect on their own position within the company and ask why, right? What happened? Why? And so it's so important that if you do lose an employee or you have to let go of an employee, that there is some level of conversation or communication around that as well. So really just keeping those things in mind. So those are the 7 costs that come with losing an employee. And once again, I think that in this time that we're in, it's really important to note that this could be losing an employee to another opportunity outright and directly, but these same costs can also come from losing an employee to potentially, another remote opportunity. So they're only sort of focused on the job that you've maybe hired them for a short period of time, and then the rest of the time maybe they're spending it on this other remote opportunity that they've found someplace else. And once again, as I've mentioned, that's something that I've been talking to a lot of leaders about, right? The fact that maybe they have this person on their team full time, but that same person on their team is also working for this other team in another country, maybe even another continent full time as well, and trying to benefit off the both. But they're not seeing the productivity. They're not seeing the same level of output as they did in the past. And so that I would also consider losing an employee as well. All right. So what can be done, right? I always think it's really important to share, what's maybe happening to build your awareness around what's potentially happening, but what can you do about it? If you recognize that you're having retention problems and that there's issues here, if you want to be very proactive, one of the things I talk a lot about recently is going from reactive to proactive. So if you want to be proactive, what are some of the things that you can do about it? So I just wanted to share some of the things that I think employees want you to keep in mind as a leader, a founder, a business owner, maybe even an investor that's maybe supporting another business. What do employees want you to keep in mind? And when I reflect back on my own time when I was working for other organizations full time, these are things that were really important to me as well. So let me share a little bit more about what that could look like. I think the first thing that's really important to keep in mind is employees will stay, right? It's so much easier to retain employees when they feel valued. And when we talk about value, I think it's also important to talk about feeling appreciated and also acknowledged. I'm sure I did a live not that long ago, or maybe I have a podcast episode about this where I talk a little bit about how sometimes we focus so much on sort of the financial return in terms of what we're giving to employees. And sometimes employees just want to be treated like human. They want a simple thank you. They want to be looked in the eyes, right? They don't want to be lied to. And that's enough for some employees. So I think that if you want to make sure that you're creating that psychological safety, if you want to be able to retain the right employees, it's so important that you make employees feel valued and appreciated. And the way to do that is by engaging and asking them what they want, and then setting the expectation that that's something that you can do for them. All right. Another thing that you probably want to keep in mind, and once again, this can look very different depending on the type of work that you do and the type of work maybe that individual does, is employees want to be well paid. One of the things I hear a lot from individuals that are sort of being challenged right now by the rise of remote work and the opportunities that are there for people all around the world to work pretty much anywhere is this idea that they feel that people are potentially leaving or not leaving, but taking on other full-time opportunities because they're being paid in a currency maybe that's a little bit more stable. And I think that that's a fair thing to keep in mind and a fair thing maybe to assume, but there might be other things going on there. And that's why it's so important to engage and create that safe environment so you can have a conversation with a member of your team if you notice that this is something that's happening. All right. Employees also stay places where they are mentored and they're coached and they feel like they're getting something out of that opportunity, right? So they're mentored, they're coached, they're trained. There's so many things they can get out of this and they can maybe use for the next opportunity that comes around. I think for me specifically, and this might not be for all employees, and that's why it's so important to have the conversation, but I really like being in places where I'm challenged. That's one of the reasons why I really love working for myself, because every single day is a bit different and I'm constantly challenged to get outside my comfort zone to make money for myself. And I think that's really, really fun. Another thing I think that's really, really important for employees, especially within maybe smaller environments or within startups, is to make sure that employees have an understanding of what the next step is or what the next level is within their position. So employees feel safe, they feel more secure when they know that, hey, if I'm working within this analyst position right now, there's an opportunity for me to move into that associate position within XYZ time. I know those of you listening to this that maybe are working within a startup or a founder, you might say to yourself, I don't know. And that's something that also potentially would need to be communicated if you want to be able to retain the right individuals. Because within a startup, you want to make sure that you are attracting people that have the right risk profile, that are excited to work within a space, maybe where things aren't as straightforward and where things could shift and change, and they're fine with that risk. So once again, it's really important to be able to communicate that. All right. The last things I have on here is employees like opportunities where they're involved. And this is really key. And I think that once again, when it comes to thinking about how do you set expectations for employees, making sure that they have an understanding of how what they're doing has an impact on the bottom line can really go very far to help to motivate them and help them to continue to work, even if maybe they're not being paid as much as they could be, or maybe even if they feel like they're not in the perfect position. So really just recognizing that by creating an environment that's challenging, involved, where they feel appreciated, it can actually go really far to help you retain employees. And even if they don't feel like they can stay there, at least that they'd be open to having a conversation with you about, hey, I'm moving to the next step, or hey, this is maybe not the best place for me anymore. So at least you can plan, and at least you'll be able to move forward knowing that you created an enabling environment, but it's maybe not the best fit for them moving forward. So that's all I think I wanted to share with everyone today. Thank you so much for joining me. If you have any thoughts, any questions, anything that you think that I missed, you can feel free to let me know in the comments. But I thought it was just really important to just share a little bit more of what happens when you aren't really focused on creating that enabling environment, and you aren't really focused on retention. If anything, it's really by focusing on retention, onboarding, right? Processes and structures that's going to allow you to attract the right people in the long term. And that's going to allow you to get your business to the next level. So once again, thank you so much for joining me on this Monday. I really appreciate it. I will be back next week, Monday, probably around the same time. I think my topic might already be up. So if you have any thoughts, any questions, you're more than welcome to drop them there. Thank you again. And I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe and sane.